Good morning, everyone, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Norway and everyone who has gathered for the conference today, and thank you for inviting me. What could be a better time or a better place to be speaking on this year's conference theme and on how development cooperation can strengthen democracy and human rights. Just yesterday, Human Rights Day was commemorated around the world. And just last night, the Nobel Peace Prize was awarded here in Oslo to Malala and to Kailash Satyarthi, outstanding champions of the rights of children and of young people. And I'll be very pleased to be on the panel with the Minister, with Kailash and with Flavia Pansieri, my colleague from the UN High Commission for Human Rights, a little later today. In my speech this morning, I wanted to explore four themes. The first, why democracy or democratic governance more broadly and human rights matter for human development. Secondly, how development cooperation is supporting democratic governance and human rights to be realised, and the lessons we're learning from this work. Thirdly, why and how partnerships are very critical to these efforts. And fourthly, looking ahead, what are the strategic priorities for this work? So firstly, democracy and human rights are very important objectives in their own right. They also happen to be very important enablers of human development by helping to create the conditions within which people can thrive. Human development recognises people as the real wealth of a nation. Making progress on human development benefits from the empowerment of people, and democracy and human rights are fundamentally about the empowerment of people. Nobel laureate Amartya Sen, one of the pioneers of UNDP's human development approach, has made this point so strongly. In his book, Development is Freedom, he states, and I quote, that democratic governance truly contributes to development by enhancing individual freedom. And such freedom is founded in the protection of human rights and ensured by strong national institutions. That powerful statement, linking democratic governance and human rights with human development, inspires our work around the world as we promote principles of good governance, including transparency, participation, inclusiveness, effectiveness, responsiveness, and accountability. In our work, we endeavour to support countries to give practical expression to the commitments they make to international human rights conventions, an approach which is at the heart of our new strategic plan, and I quote, "We recognise the intrinsic value of the body of economic, political, social, civil and cultural rights established by the United Nations, which are pursued through the human rights-based and other approaches." In 2000, heads of state and government, including me as New Zealand Prime Minister at the time, signed the Millennium Declaration. The words of the declaration could not be clearer. Quote, "We will spare no effort to promote democracy and strengthen the rule of law, as well as respect for all internationally recognised human rights and fundamental freedoms, including the right to development." The declaration went on to be very specific and said that the signatories, and this was all world leaders at the time, resolved to respect and uphold the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, strive for the full protection and promotion of those civil, political, economic, social and cultural rights for all, strengthen capacity for democracy and respect for human rights, including minority rights, implement the Convention for the Elimination of the Discrimination Against Women, and combat all forms of violence against women, ensure respect and protection for the human rights of migrants and their families, work collectively for more inclusive political processes, allowing genuine participation by all citizens in our countries, and ensure freedom of the media and public access to information. I think you'll agree that this gives a very strong basis for the work of UNDP and other agencies in the UN development system. Across the Millennium Declaration, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and all other UN human rights instruments, this vision of a better, fairer and more just world is conveyed, and directly and indirectly they guide the scope of our work and shape the values and practices of our practitioners around the world. UNDP has not been given either a normative nor a monitoring role in human rights. Yet the emergence of the human development paradigm with its people-centred approach in the 1990s gave new perspectives on how our work could support the realisation of human rights and help build institutions and their capacity for more inclusive, responsive and accountable governance. So our work on democratic governance supports the right to human dignity, the right to have a say in decisions which affect one's life, and principles of empowerment and equity. At the UN General Assembly's high-level meeting on the rule of law in 2012, the member states agreed that the advancement of the rule of law at national and international levels is essential for sustained and inclusive economic growth, sustainable development, the eradication of poverty, and the full realisation of all human rights and fundamental freedoms, including the right to development, all of which in turn reinforce the rule of law. So all these very strong global statements signed by member states do inspire and drive the long-term mission we have to build and strengthen the national capacities and institutions which will drive development, progress, empower civil society, and expand people's opportunities to participate in decision-making processes, particularly for those who are traditionally excluded, so often women and young people and poor communities and many others. Our work does include support to institutions like parliaments to become more effective on behalf of the citizens they serve. It includes building the capacity of the public administrations to deliver basic services and engage better with communities. It includes helping countries to expand access to justice, tackle corruption, and implement those human rights commitments they made when they signed and ratified international human rights instruments. Today, we calculate that more than half of our country officers are working explicitly to advance the rights of groups which are discriminated against, vulnerable and/or otherwise marginalised, and more than 60 of them are reporting to us that they're working with host countries to support efforts to realise human rights through the national human rights institutions, including through work on harmonising the country's legislation with those internationally ratified human rights laws and instruments and to mainstream human rights. A couple of examples. Timor-Leste, for example, we supported their Providoria for human rights and justice by helping to introduce new legal and operational management policies, train their staff, draft relevant policies and legislation, and design methodology and tools for strategic planning. In Croatia, we supported the establishment of the People's Ombudsman, one of the main institutions providing a redress mechanism for citizens, in particular as it worked to uphold new anti-discrimination legislation, and that system has become a model for the region. We support governments to meet their obligations under the Universal Periodic Review process of the UN Human Rights Council, and we've provided support to a very wide range of countries around the world's regions on that. Then we work to protect the rights of all people living with HIV as we work to prevent the spread of the virus, including by reaching out to at-risk communities, often a very important entry point for human rights work. Those at-risk communities include men having sex with men, sex workers, and injecting drug users. With partners, we've supported more than 80 countries to take forward recommendations of the Global Commission on HIV and the Law, which we established and serviced. We see legal and policy reform to extend the full protection of the law and uphold the rights of all as vital to turning the tide decisively on HIV. In all these efforts, We work very closely with civil society partners to strengthen human rights protection for the lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans and intersex communities. And I'm very pleased to see invited to this conference Frank Mugisha from the Sexual Minorities Uganda organisation, who is such a prominent advocate for legal protection for marginalised groups. We're providing rule of law support to more than 100 developing countries, including those very badly affected by conflict and crisis, hoping through this work to help strengthen the capacity of governments to govern better, deliver justice, and improve the capacities of people to access legal services, ultimately helping to strengthen protection against violence and discrimination. In Somalia, for example, Norway has been a major supporter of our work on governance and rule of law. Through our program there, we've been able to establish mobile courts and legal aid clinics. And this has led to the number of people accessing the formal justice system every year increasing quite dramatically. We've been able to provide support for women to enrol in law schools and graduate through internships and other opportunities. While women should be able to work in all capacities across the justice sector, it's also very important that they can be visible in the administration of the law on gender-specific injustices, including those related to who has custody of children, to inheritance and land and property rights. Norwegian support for our work in Uganda has also helped to strengthen women's property rights through the Slum Women's Initiative for Development, which has been a very important step in gender rights. Challenges around land tenure were mapped and women were supported to better understand the process and what their rights were. And we do thank Norway for its consistently strong support to all these kinds of efforts under our democratic governance pillar of work. What lessons have we learned? Well, back in 2010, our Global Human Development Report looked at the enormous diversity of pathways to human development. And perhaps one of the most important lessons has been that there isn't any one formula for democratic governance, nor for transitions towards it. Countries may be differently democratic, and we work in so many different contexts to advance democratic governance. But we see the young and the older democracies alike sharing the common objective of getting to more effective, accountable, and responsive governance. Systems which expand people's freedoms and choices, enabling them to live lives they value. That is the vision for human development which underlies our work. Today, the large majority of developing countries are formal democracies, and more people than ever before do live in countries which are based on the rule of law and party to international human rights treaties. There are now over 100 national human rights institutions, the cornerstone of national systems of the promotion and protection of human rights. And the majority of those national human rights institutions do comply with the international standards. All good news. However, assessments of global progress often tend to obscure the lack of gains for significant populations, both within countries and across regions. In particular, women, ethnic minorities, and other often excluded groups often continue to be denied their full human rights. Growing inequality in many countries and that unequal fulfillment of human rights undermine democratic governance. There is a pressing need to overcome problems of exclusion and marginalisation. Every day, news media report horrific and distressing human rights violations around the world, and that must motivate us all to do more to see the UN vision for human rights fulfilled and its many instruments upheld and implemented. Inclusive governance requires citizens to be able to participate in meaningful ways in the affairs of their country and be able to make their voice heard. Wherever we can, UNDP supports countries' efforts to establish environments in which political parties, civil society, and free and ethical media can flourish, and where women, youth, Indigenous peoples, ethnic minorities, and others so often excluded can participate and be represented. In our role, we support adherence to international norms within a very wide range of political and development contexts. Our new strategic plan emphasises the need for democratic governance to promote voice, the rule of law and accountability, and build the institutional capacities to deliver basic services to all and empower all people to claim their rights. We bring to partnerships around this work our universal presence and decades of experience in giving policy support and capacity development at the intersection of democratic governance, human rights, and human development. We have a proven ability to influence policy and build capacity, and we're seen as a trusted partner working across sectors and with multiple stakeholders, often on the most sensitive of issues in countries. The partnerships we have with civil society are critical in raising public awareness, promoting participation and voice, and creating that critical space for an informed and inclusive policy dialogue with government. The private sector, the foundations, and the think tanks are increasingly important to our work. I understand that last year the Oslo Governance Centre we have here worked with the Foundation for the Future to bring together leading think tanks from 6 countries in the Arab States region to discuss their vital roles in democratic transitions. The strong support of bilateral partners like Norway is so important for institutions like ours to be able to deliver on this mandate to push forward democratic governance. Norway and other partners also engage through our executive board to help us set priorities and evaluate what works. We really value all these contributions to help us deliver on this mandate. It is not only to our core funding, but to major thematic funds which we have and particular initiatives within countries. So looking ahead, the Millennium Development Goals are due to run their course by the end of 2015. Discussion is well advanced on what the next global development agenda might look like. The UN development system has facilitated an unprecedented number of global and national consultations on shaping the new agenda. And these have enabled people from all walks of life, including from the poorest and most marginalised communities and groupings, to share their hopes and priorities for the future. It was no surprise to me that health, education, and opportunities to work came out as people's very top priorities. But what did fascinate me was that next came a desire to see honest and responsive governance, indicating that people around our world know how important that is for getting sustained and inclusive development results. I think it's very important that the post-2015 agenda does reflect the hopes and aspirations of the world's peoples. That will increase its legitimacy and the level of confidence which people have in global processes. For UNDP, it is very significant that the proposals of the UN General Assembly's Open Working Group on the Sustainable Development Goals are so much in line with the outcomes of the public consultations and with the work which UNDP itself is mandated to do. There is Goal 16 in this Open Working Group report on promoting peaceful and inclusive societies, providing access to justice for all, and building effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions. This addresses the very foundations of development. And it has proposed targets around promoting the rule of law and participatory and representative decision-making, tackling corruption, and promoting and enforcing laws against discrimination. Many of these targets are inspired by international human rights instruments. The outcome of the public consultations on post-2015 and the proposals by the General Assembly's Open Working Group suggests that the international community is increasingly recognising the interlinkages between democratic governance, human rights, and sustainable development. This insight, of course, is far from novel here in Norway, a country which has been advocating for such and holistic approach to development for many years. So I would like to conclude my comments by thanking and commending Norway for being such a strong leader, advocate and partner for the world on these efforts, and in particular for UNDP's efforts to strengthen governance and human rights for development. Thank you.